Hello, in today's video we're going to be covering the last part of section 8.5 on using intercept form. Our essential questions is what is some of the characteristics of the graph of f of x is equal to a times the quantity of x minus p times the quantity of x minus q. I'd like for you to take a moment to pause the video and recall graphing quadratics from intercept form. Go ahead and take a moment, pause the video, and do that now. In my first function g of x, I know that the zeros are -1 and -7. So I'm going to go ahead and put my -1 and my -7 on my graph. So then to find the x value of my vertex, I simply add those two numbers and divide by 2. So -8/2 tells me that my vertex lies on the axis of symmetry somewhere at -4. So this is my axis of symmetry, or that fold right down the center of my graph. So I know that my vertex has an x value of -4. So I'm going to go ahead now and evaluate g of -4 and figure out what is the y value of my vertex. -3 times -4 plus 1 times -4 plus 7. I've got 9 times 3, which is a positive 27, which means that my vertex is way up beyond my graph, so my parabola is going to be a downward-facing parabola that looks something more or less like this. That vertex should be at -4, and the y value is going to be positive 27. To complete number 2, I'm first going to factor it. When I factor, I've got x minus 6 times x plus 5, giving me the zeros of positive 6 and -5. So to determine where my vertex is, I add those two values, 6 plus a -5, and divide by 2. And I end up with an axis of symmetry at 1/2. So here's my axis of symmetry. To determine where the vertex lies, I then go plug in 1/2, so y equals 1/2 squared minus 1/2 minus 30. So 1/4 minus 1/2 minus 30. -1/4 minus 30 is going to be -30 and 1/4, or -121/4. Either way, that is way beyond my graph again, so somewhere way down here at positive 1/2 and -30 and 1/4. So my parabola is going to be an upward-facing parabola looking something like this. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to work backwards. I'm going to give you some conditions and ask you to create the parabola or the equation for the parabola that has those conditions. So the first one is simply that we want a parabola that has a vertex at the point -3, 4. So all I'm going to do is make sure that my equation, in whatever form, satisfies that condition. So I'm going to go ahead and use vertex form. Vertex form looks like this. F of x equals a times x minus h squared plus k, where h is the x value of my vertex and k is the y value of my vertex. So I'll go ahead and plug in those values. A times x minus h, which is a -3, and then plus k, which is 4. So this puts my vertex at the point -3, 4. So f of x equals a times x plus 3 squared plus 4. Now all they asked for was an equation that has a vertex at -3, 4. We don't have any other conditions on this parabola. Well, A is going to tell us how wide or narrow our parabola is, but we aren't asked to make our parabola any more specific than just having a vertex at -3, 4. So I can make that value of a whatever I want. As long as my vertex is at -3, 4, my a could be 1, it could be -7, it could be 5. Doesn't matter what the value of a is because we have satisfied the only condition that we are asked to have. I'm going to go ahead and make a 1. so that I don't have any other values that make this equation more complicated than it needs to be. All right, your turn. Pause the video and try out B on your own. Here we should have g of x is equal to x minus 5 squared minus 2, and your a value can be left as 1 like it is here, or you can put any number that you would like in for a. As long as your vertex is at 5, negative 2, we don't care how wide or narrow our graph is. We're going to step it up a little bit and have some additional conditions on our parabola. So now I'm asking you to write the equation of a parabola that passes through these 3 points. Since we are given points, and specifically we are given intercepts, these 2 points here are intercepts, I'm going to go ahead and use intercept form. So f of x is equal to a times x minus p times x minus q, where p and q are intercepts. So I can plug in now my p and my q. My first intercept is a negative 9, and my second intercept is a negative 2, and I know that these are intercepts because the y values are 0. The y value is 0, then x is an intercept. Simplifying, f of x is equal to a times x plus 9 times x plus 2. So far, we have included the first 2 points that we are asked to include. What we haven't included is that third point. Our parabola must cross through negative 420. So all I'm going to do now is say that I know when I plug in a negative 4 for x, I get 20 for y. So we're going to go ahead and plug in those values for x and y and force a to be the value that it needs to be in order to get that value, that point of negative 420. So I'll go ahead and put a 20 in for y equals a times x plus 9 times x plus 2, but x is a negative 4. And now we're going to solve and see what a needs to be. So 20 is equal to a times 5 times negative 2. So 20 is equal to negative 10a, which means that a is a negative 2. So I can go back up to my equation now and replace a with negative 2. So f of x is equal to negative 2 times x plus 9 times x plus 2, and we are done. This is the equation of the parabola that crosses through those 3 points. All right, go ahead and pause the video and try out B on your own. Again, we are given intercepts here, so I'm going to go ahead and use intercept form. G of x is equal to a times x minus p times x minus q. And I know that these 2 first points are intercepts because the y value is 0. So p could be negative 3 and q could be a positive 1. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the values of p and q with those values in my equation. P is a negative 3 and x is a positive 1, and this equation then simplifies to a times x plus 3 times x minus 1. So we have those first 2 conditions satisfied. Our parabola will cross through those 2 points. What we need to think about now is this third point. So I know that if I put in a 3 for my x's, I will get a 6 out for y, and that can help us figure out what my a value needs to be. So x is 3 plus 3 times x is 3 minus 1. 6 is equal to a times 6 times 2. This is 12a, and dividing by 12, I find that a is equal to 1/2. So then I go back up to my equation and simply replace my a value with 1/2. And this would be the equation of the parabola that passes through the 3 ordered pairs we were given. All right, go ahead and take a moment, pause the video, and try these two, as well as our next two, on your own. Our first practice simply has x-intercepts of -1 and 1, so I can write any parabola as long as it crosses through those two intercepts. So an x-intercept of -1 means we have a factor of x plus 1, and of +1 means we have a factor of x minus 1. Now we don't have any third point to cross through, so we don't care what our a value is here. We can leave it as 1 like it is now, or we can fill it in with any other value. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as 1, and we have one of a few equations that will pass through those 2 points. Number 10, all we care about is that we have a vertex at 8, 8. So I'm going to go ahead and use vertex form, x minus 8 squared plus 8. So this is the x value of my vertex and the y value of my vertex. And again, we can fill in our a value with any value here as long as we have a vertex at 8, 8. We don't care how wide or narrow our parabola is. Lastly, I've got two intercepts, so here my p will be 0 and my q will be 10. So g of x is equal to a times x minus 0 times x minus 10. And I'll go ahead and simplify that. G of x is equal to a times x minus 10. And then I'm going to plug in an x of 4 and a y of 12. So I've got a times 4 times 6, giving me an a value of 1/2. So my equation then, g of x is going to equal 1/2 times x minus 10. I just replace the a with 1/2. Here my p is -5 and my q is +4. So a times x plus 5 times x minus 4. And then I replace x with 3 and y with -16 to determine the value of a. So -16 is equal to a times 8 times -1, which tells me that a is going to be 2. So my equation, I need to go all the way back up to h of x. H of x is equal to 2 times x plus 5 times x minus 4. And that brings us to the end of our video today. Thanks so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.